So Karen, I've appreciated your patient counsel over the years, and thank you so much for that. But we're here to talk about your book, so let's kick it off. So this is obviously the second version of a book that you previously wrote. What do you hope that people will learn from it?
It is the second version, and my publisher is here. We talked about writing a second book. The first one was way too much work. And then I went home, and this is in the book, so I'm not disclosing anything else. And I read the book from cover to cover, and I said, oh my gosh, this is old. So much. It came out in 2019, and since that time, the fintech world, which many of you participate in, has exploded and changed. Not only was there the pandemic, which was the worst small business crisis, even worse than the financial crisis where I was in Washington and in the White House. And so much happened in that crisis. Fintech enabled many, many small businesses to get access to the PPP loans and capital that they needed. But beyond that, the fintech and small business lending world is even more powerfully ready to transform than I anticipated. And that has sort of two sides to it. I thought that after I wrote the book in 2019, immediately technology would take over small business lending. It would take away these frictions that were occurring where small business owners had to go down to their bank with a stack of paperwork.
No, it was a wagon. People would,
yes.
the lenders would actually bring a wagon filled with documents to go.
Well, it was a wagon when you had an SBA loan because we had extra documents. But we tried to make it a little small wagon. But this, really hasn't transpired. It hasn't transformed as fast as I would have expected. And one of the questions I try to address in the book is, why is this transformation taking so long? Why is it so difficult? And the answer turns out to be that this is a really complicated area. Small business lending sounds like this tiny segment, but in fact, there are so many small businesses of different types. There are so many different kinds of loans.
Every parts supplier is different than every dry cleaner.
Not only are they different, the loan product they want is different. They might be wanting a loan to buy, a piece of machinery, or they might be wanting a cash flow loan to buy inventory. So all kinds of use cases need to be addressed. And this makes it very complicated to create all of the algorithms. I thought you would just suck all the data in, put it in a magic algorithm, and out would come all the answers. Well, as the people who are working on this in Enigma and Prime know, it's a much more difficult problem than that. But the good news is, because it's a more difficult problem, it also is a more powerful solution and a more transformative set of tools when we get the answers. Yeah. And that is what the book is really about. It's about the power of technology to transfer small business lending and create access and opportunity for this segment of the economy, which could not only drive more growth in jobs, but it also creates more access to the American dream.
We've talked over the years about the opportunity that financial technology provides. What were you seeing, maybe even back at the White House or even prior to, you were a venture capitalist for a while? What were you seeing that kind of prompted you to think financial technology has this promise?
There's a gap in small business lending. The market doesn't work optimally. And Rand Paul was a senator at that time and was sort of cross-examining me in a hearing. And he said, why does the SBA even exist? I mean, why would we, And of course, my answer was, it's because it's a market failure. And when there's a market failure, there's a role for government. And what was the role? The role was to create loan guarantees for people who were creditworthy, but the banks weren't serving. And that is part of the gap that's out there. Why? Because banks don't have insight into small businesses. They can't, we call this information opacity. They can't see whether a small business is even profitable or not. And this gap exists in a couple of sectors: women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and the smallest and the newest businesses. So these prevent us from having the benefit of more successful small businesses. I felt the burden of this because the SBA portfolio is $100 billion. The loss rate on those loans is 4%. So that's $96 billion of great loans, creditworthy loans, that would not be made if the government hadn't intervened. That's the market failure. And that's what we hope technology will maybe address.
But there's also the idea of banks themselves. This has been a criticism of banks, is that they don't want to lend to the smaller guys because they're making less money on them. It takes more effort to lend to the smaller company.
It's the same effort to make $1 million loan, as a $100,000 loan or a $10,000 loan. So nobody makes a loan under $50,000, and 70% of the loans that are requested are under $100,000. So there's a big piece of the market that's just not getting served.
Yeah. So you talked about during the pandemic, obviously technology ratcheted up. There was even fintechs were lending to, supporting PPP loans at the time. Pretty incredible step forward for this this community. But did the fraud that happened sort of in these various programs set these well-intentioned companies back?
So the impetus to write this book was in part to talk about the real story of the pandemic. And I see some of my HBS students who actually went out and worked with small businesses to get loans, worked with the SBA. And so to all of you in the fintech world, really thank you for working so hard for small businesses in that time. We forget how bad the pandemic was.
I don't.
It was really, a dire time. And small businesses were this close to being gone. So I went back and looked at the fraud and based analysis of the PPP loans, what the benefits were and what the fraud was. That showed that the fraud is less than 10%. Arguably, depending on where the numbers fall out, because some of it is still out there, less than 5%. That's 5%, by the way, of a very big number. So
Trillion?
It's billions and billions. It's 1.2 trillion of total aid, and 800 billion of the PPP. It's a lot of money. And so I'm not saying there weren't a lot of bad actors, but on the whole, for getting it out super quickly, all the data shows that we would have had many, many more business failures, lots of boarded up businesses on Main Street. And when your business fails, it's 6 months or a year before that Main Street shop gets a new tenant. So I think it was well worth, and the data, and we looked at all the economists who have studied it, that V-shaped recovery, a lot of it was because the small business community got the help they needed quickly, and that cost some money in fraud, but it was worth it.
Have you spent time thinking about the other ways that they could have deployed the capital? Like, for instance, through the IRS, give everybody some money instead of going through actual employers? Why? I mean, did we do the right thing?
So I spend a lot of time in Europe and the UK, and they have a registry of small business owners. So they just sent the money right to the small businesses, and they sent the money right to the consumers. And there was no fraud because they know who everybody is. We don't know who all our small business owners are, and the small business community likes it that way. So for us to have a registry of small business owners or to use the IRS is politically very difficult. It would have been much more effective, but it is anathema a bit to our culture.
I'm glad you and others are thinking about what to do, because should this ever happen again, one needs to revisit the past to know we can avoid the mistakes in the future. So does the SBA need to be more innovative? And I ask this because, I I wrote a big feature about the SBA last year. We had Isabella Guzman, a part of the story. She's the current SBA administrator. In my reporting, all of the sort of the offices around, there's like 78 or so offices around the country, and they're all skeleton crews, just floors and floors of empty office space. The SBA is like a shell of its former self. And I guess, is that a good thing? How are we today?
Are you sure they're not working from home?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe they're working from home. So I'm a big fan of Isabel Guzman. I think the SBA's funding has increased every year, both in the Trump administration and definitely in the Biden administration. And it is, under Isabel Guzman, it is undergoing a lot of technological change, a lot, much more than I was ever able to achieve. So I think she's actually getting the job done. But I think SBA will always be a lagging indicator. I think the fintech world has the responsibility and the mantle of taking forward digital lending. And people ask also, shouldn't the SBA do direct lending? Why does the SBA go through 4,000 banks? Isn't that inefficient? And what I tell Congress, too, is it's much more efficient. It's the ultimate public-private partnership. You get all the bankers to do the work. The SBA just reviews it and sees if it wants to add a government guarantee. And as a result, the SBA has programs that are almost free to taxpayers, costless to taxpayers, because they have not very many losses, and the bankers, the third parties, do all the work. So I think the SBA is actually one of the U.S.'s hidden gems. And as I said to President Obama, he interviewed me to take the job because we didn't know each other. And he said, should we get rid of the SBA? And I said, oh, Mr. President-elect, no. It's a ruby in the rough. It's not a diamond, but it's a little jewel, and it can be powerful. And I think what we found, Saudi Arabia just copied the program. It's a very powerful way to help small businesses without creating a lot of infrastructure and without a lot of cost, because it's only a guarantee.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the big dark cloud in this, I mean, we ride happily into the sunset on the back of, companies that are here like Prime and Enigma, except for one thing, which is what I call the dark side of the black box. We are all, excited about AI, and AI plays a big role in the book. But with data and reliance on machine learning, which there are several experts in the room, you all know, and AI and generative AI, a lot of things get worrisome. And in small business lending, data ownership, data transparency, data security are all huge issues. Open banking is still not codified by appropriate regulations in the U.S. U.S. regulation is behind on all of these. And there's a chart in the book I call Spaghetti Soup, which describes the U.S. regulatory environment. And it is 7 federal regulators and 50 state banking regulators. So 57 regulators. Very, very difficult for clear, appropriate regulation to provide the safety and security for the world that we're entering into. And without these guidelines, both the fintechs and the banks are reluctant and anxious and at risk. And so are small businesses who get taken advantage of. So we have a lot of work to do on that side to clean it up. And there has been a big fight in the past about more regulation versus less regulation. That's not the fight we should be having. The fight is, how do we have smart regulation that actually solves the problem without creating undue burdens for the banks, the small businesses, and the technologists who are trying to solve the problem.
And if Kamala Harris asked you to give her counsel as she's potentially going to be president, will you be helping her?
Yeah, I try to keep a small finger in the political world. I wasn't very active in politics before I went to Washington. And I have to say it was the greatest honor of my life to serve with President Barack Obama. The nation needs our leaders, and it's a bit of a thankless job because politics has gotten very tough and very dirty. And I think anybody who goes forward, and I urge everybody too, to take a role in public service at this time, maybe with one of the regulators. That would be great. It will benefit everybody. And the rewards were much more than I ever could have imagined. So it's not actually a thankless job. It's a rewarding job. But I would try to do my best to, if asked, to advise.
Yeah.
To advise.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Karen Mills, for joining us this evening. Wonderful talking.
Thank you.